I knew the marriage was over in 1974. I was 42 years old. Dorothy was 39. We were sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had just come back from my weekly poker game with the Hennessy brothers, and she asked me to pass the salt. And I passed it. And she said, "Thank you." And I said, "You're welcome." And that was it. That was all we had. I sat there looking at the salt shaker and I thought, this is a woman I do not know anymore. And what was worse than the loneliness, worse than the distance, was that I was not sure I wanted to. I didn't leave. I want to talk about why I didn't leave. Not because I think there's a lesson in it. There isn't, really. Not one I can hand to you cleanly. I'm 93 years old and I've had a long time to sit with this, and I still can't make it into a lesson. What I can do is tell you what it actually felt like from the inside, because I think a lot of people know what I'm describing and nobody says it plainly. So let me say it plainly. Dorothy and I married I was 26. She was 23. She wore a dress her mother had altered, and I wore a suit that was slightly too large in the shoulders, and we were genuinely happy. I want to make sure that's clear. There was a period, maybe the first 8 years, where things were real, where I would come home and she would be reading on the couch, and the sight of her there, just the sight of her, would make something loosen in my chest. We had 2 children. We had a house in Glendale with a lemon tree in the backyard that I was forever promising to trim. We had a life that fit. And then slowly, the way those things go, it stopped fitting. I couldn't tell you when exactly. There was no event, no betrayal, no dramatic turning point. It was more like, you know how a photograph fades, not all at once. You don't notice it day to day. And then one morning you pick it up and realize the colors are gone, and you can't even say when that happened. That's what it was. We faded. By the time our daughter Carol was in high school, Dorothy and I had separate emotional lives that occasionally overlapped at dinner. We were polite. We were functional. We went to other people's parties and stood beside each other and were considered a solid couple, a steady couple. I think that word steady was the word people used. Steady. I hated that word. I want to tell you about a specific evening. This was 1969. Carol would have been, let me think, 11. Our son Richard was 14. I had just been passed over for a promotion I had been working toward for 3 years. I came home and the house smelled like the pot roast Dorothy made on Fridays. And the kids were doing homework at the dining room table. And Dorothy was standing at the stove, and she turned around and looked at me and said, "How was your day?" And I almost told her. I had my mouth open. I was going to say it was terrible. I'm devastated. I feel like a fool. I was going to say all of it. I was standing in the doorway of my own kitchen with my coat still on, and I had about 2 seconds where it felt possible, where I thought she might hold that with me, and then I saw her eyes go back to the stove, not cruelly, not dismissively. She just moved on, preemptively, like she already knew there was nothing there worth waiting for. I said, "Fine, busy," and I went upstairs and changed my clothes. That was the loneliness, not the big empty loneliness of being unloved. The small, specific loneliness of being right there and still alone. I think that kind is harder, because there's no clean break in it. You can't point to it. You just carry it around in your coat pockets, all the small moments that almost happen. So why didn't I leave? I've had 50 years to think about this, and here's what I've come to. I was afraid. That's the whole answer. All roads come back to that. But fear is not one thing. It has rooms inside it. And I want to walk you through the rooms, because each one is a little different. The first room is the fear of silence. I grew up in a house that was never quiet. 6 kids, a father who worked nights and came home and immediately started fixing something, a mother who had the radio on from morning until she went to bed. Noise was life. When I married Dorothy and we had children, and the house was full of sound, even ordinary sound, the television, the kids arguing, the refrigerator door, I didn't realize what that sound was doing for me. It was holding me up. It was proof of something. When I tried to imagine leaving, I tried to imagine an apartment somewhere. Me, alone, Tuesday night. And the silence in that image was not peaceful. It was cavernous, like standing inside something that had been evacuated. I could not picture myself in that silence and surviving it. The second room is the fear of what leaving would mean about me. I was raised by a man who did not quit. That was the foundational principle of his character, and therefore of mine. You did not quit jobs. You did not quit towns. You certainly did not quit families. Quitting was a moral failure. Quitting was for people with weak constitutions, and I had absorbed that so completely that even when I knew in the way you know things that live in your body and not just your head, that the marriage had become a kind of mutual endurance, I could not frame leaving as anything other than failure, weakness. I stayed because leaving felt like an admission of something I was not prepared to admit. I was not prepared to be that kind of man. The third room, and this is the one that took me the longest to look at directly, is shame. Not shame about the marriage, shame about wanting out of it. Because from the outside, we had everything: a house, children, 40 years of accumulated history. We had been to each other's parents' funerals. We had shared illnesses and graduations and the slow, ordinary tragedy of watching our children leave. To stand up and say, "I am not happy here," felt obscene, almost like complaining about something that others would have been grateful for. Who was I to be unhappy? What right did I have to want more than this solid, adequate life? So the wanting stayed underground. And when something stays underground long enough, you stop calling it wanting. You call it just the way things are. And that becomes its own kind of prison, not because anyone locked the door, but because you stopped believing there was a door. Dorothy died in 2009. We had been married 51 years. In her last few years when she was ill, I took care of her. I want to be careful about how I say what I'm about to say, because it could be misunderstood. Taking care of her felt right, felt like the right use of whatever I had left. I don't know if that was love exactly. I'm not sure what love is at that age. It was something, tenderness maybe. The tenderness you have for someone who has been present for most of your life, even when the presence was more adjacency than intimacy. When she died, I was 77 years old, and I cried, genuinely, not for the marriage we'd had. I think I was crying for the one we hadn't. Here's something I've never said out loud before. About 8 years before she died, this would have been around 2001, 2002, I went to a conference in Portland for work. I was long retired by then, but I was on an advisory board and they still asked me to come once a year. And at a dinner on the second evening, I sat next to a woman named Vera. She was 68, maybe 69. She was a retired school teacher from somewhere in Oregon. She had white hair and she laughed at herself constantly. And we talked for 3 hours about nothing important. Books, a hiking trail she loved, the particular quality of light in the Pacific Northwest in October. I thought about Vera for 6 months after that dinner. Not obsessively, not with any, I don't want to overstate this, but I would be doing something ordinary, washing a dish, driving somewhere, and she would come to mind. That laugh, the way she described that trail like she was describing something sacred. I thought that's what I wanted. That, just that ease, that curiosity, that sense of someone being genuinely present with you. And then I would think, well, it's too late now, and I would go back to washing the dish. I am 93 years old and I am sitting here in a room that is very quiet. I've had 14 years now of the silence I was so afraid of, and it turns out the silence doesn't kill you. That's not wisdom. I'm not handing you wisdom. It's just a fact. The thing I was most afraid of turned out to be survivable. That's all. I don't know what I would have done differently. I'm not sure that's even a useful question at this point. The life happened. It had real things in it. My children are real. The lemon tree was real. The pot roast on Fridays was real. But there was a Tuesday night in 1974 when I was 42 years old, and I looked at a salt shaker and knew something was over, and then I stayed for 35 more years. I stayed because I was afraid. I just wanted to say it out loud once before I don't get the chance to say it anymore. That's all.